Hello everyone, Linker here, and today we're going to understand what makes heroes strong in the endgame. And specifically, we'll look into the new graveborn hero, Daimon, so you can understand how he works and how to analyze new heroes as they're introduced. Now, Daimon is a graveborn warrior tank with high HP, pretty good defense, and mediocre attack. He appears as two heroes in the game, as you can see, both Daimon, who's the boy, and Stitchy, who's the large doll over here. And both of them are separate units in the game, so much like the twins, you'll have those two heroes that are kind of fighting on their own. But if Daimon dies, Stitchy dies. Being the Graveborn that he is means that he's accessible through the wishlist and target summons, and this is very important to understand. So as you can see over here, you could just push him on your wishlist right here, unlike others that are Hypogeans or Celestials, which are otherwise very hard for beginners to get. So he's a very accessible hero for you, and definitely one of those heroes that many late game players put on their target pools to get their desired Daimon. So, being so accessible as a tank, you'll see that he can withstand a lot of damage and he's actually gaining a lot of popularity, but he's also able to dish significant damage to his enemies. So let's get right back onto him. He has all kinds of abilities that allow him to really pull off the damage that he does. And starting off, let's just have Stitchy explained. So Stitchy has this one ability here, except for his basics, that is Inanimate Companion. Here, Daimon uses Stitchy to attack 3 times with massive scaling. 200% on each attack is essentially 600% when it all stacks by. So massive scalings on Stitchy. And if all 3 attacks hit in a row, and Stitchy can be interrupted, but if all 3 attacks hit, the enemies stand for a long 3-second duration. So there's also a secondary ability for that effect that makes Daimon very tanky, which is every 9 seconds, Stitchy heals Daimon, scaling off of that damage that Stitchy received. Having Daimon backline and Stitchy frontline makes a lot of sense here, because against all these kinds of burst compositions, as long as Daimon and Stitchy can stay alive together, you'll see that he will heal him for a lot of health essentially, and this will come very crucial against those different burst compositions. However, that's only relevant if 9 seconds go by, so Laika might be handled like something that Daimon could handle, but he really hates those bursting compositions when it comes to it, like Aaron, that will sometimes finish a match in 3, 4, or 5 seconds. Now his second ability, his Blood Shield, as you can see over here, is stealing a quarter of the enemy's health from them, not killing them. So that health bar is turned into a shield, the little shield that you can see over here, where after 5 seconds the shield is healed back to the enemy. Now, 2 things to understand about that. What's left of the shield is healed to the enemy. So if the shield was bursted, nothing is healed. If some damage was taken, then some will be healed. But essentially, if no damage was taken, the whole shield will be healed. So if Daimon stays alive and takes this damage, the enemy is essentially punching into their own heal. And the second thing you want to understand, except the fact that this CC is so cool to see, because nothing is done. It just steals the health and the enemy is punching onto themselves. I really like it, is that if the enemy dies, they won't be healed. So Daimon's allies and other abilities can make that shield, can actually kill the enemy while the shield is active, which will mean that Daimon has essentially stolen the health from the enemy, gained the shield, and that's not healed back. Now being at the quarter of the enemy health makes this crazy. It's just so much damage, as you will see over here over time. And I'll slow this down a little so you can catch the next ability. The next ability is going to be Forbidden Power. Now Forbidden Power, it might fool you because it has very low scaling on it, so you might think it's bad, but as you can see over here, while Stitchy will be attacking, Daimon will use this ability, and both grant energy to Daimon. So this ability is not about the damage that it does or the damage that Daimon takes, but rather about generation of energy. So because both Stitchy is attacking and Daimon is using this ability to gain even more energy, Daimon will be ulting very fast as the match goes on, allowing him to synergize with all kinds of heroes I bet you can already guess. And lastly, the ultimate. So it has a low scaling attack damage on enemies, 260%, but that's not the main point of it. The main point of it is the fact that it uses special blood shield against 3 of the highest health enemies. So that's a lot of health stolen right from those enemies, and all the mechanics of blood shield still apply. But this also means that Daimon takes 35% of his allies' damage, not dying by it. This means that all allies take 35% less damage for the bloodshed duration, which starts by 5 seconds, but you can increase it by various means, which we'll look into later. Next, there's Daimon's signature ability, and I'll pull it up so it's easier to see over here. I'll also add an image, I think. It's going to be Stitchy too. So the signature item is going to be Stitchy's abilities to go really, really crazy, and this is where you want to pay attention. So Daimon gets 40% of the enemy's attack and 60% of their defense every time that the shield is active, and that's very, very big, because scaling by the enemy is exactly what makes those heroes strong. And I think you already know what's going to be my final verdict on this guy. As you can see, maybe I'm a little bit biased, but he has all those abilities that work with it. For example, he can permanently acquire the attack and defense of the enemy if the enemy dies through that duration. So if the shield lasts long enough, not only has Daimon stolen health, dealt a lot of damage to that enemy, but also will grant a permanent attack and defense buff for the rest of the match, which means that Daimon will grow much stronger, and the rest of his abilities will also become much stronger. So it's something to really watch out for. But lastly, both the ultimate and the signature item want the blood shield to go longer, because as the length of the blood shield increases, the ally buff increases. The time that the enemy is punching into their own health essentially increases, and the time that allies are taking less damage, as I've said, also increases. So the signature item plus 30 is really useful here, increasing the duration of blood shield by 2 extra seconds. This is almost half of the length more of the whole thing going on. This applies both on the blood shield and on the ult. Now lastly, we'll look at his furniture. His furniture, and I think I'll pull up an image nearby, is going to make it so that Daimon gets all the enemies to take 40% extra damage. 40%, but this is really unheard of. If you look at the Elder Tree, you have already abilities that are highly prioritized and people are saying are broken all over the game, where in Might you'll have, just with little investment over here, this ability making all enemies take 18% extra damage. Now Daimon gets you 14% extra damage on enemies that attack him for a much longer duration, which is completely broken, and we'll look into how crazy exactly is this guy in just a second. And the second ability on his furniture that you'd like to watch an eye for is actually gonna make it so that the allies have an additional shield on top of the extra duration. So the additional shield is really gonna help all allies, because once Daimon dies, they're gonna be granted with this final shield from him, so that they'll take less damage for an extra duration of time, which is super synergistic. Now, let me show you a replay while I analyze this complete beast of a hero. I've personally used my Daimon. He's only Elite Plus, Legendary Plus, because he's a relatively new hero over here, but as you can see, he's on par with all these great heroes that I used in the tower. So Feral, full investment, deals about the same damage as Daimon, counting for all the health stolen from those very high level enemies, as well as all these heals that you'll see Daimon get himself, while he could take a lot of damage, and not all of it is accounted for here. So let's just take a look how Daimon does against much higher level wielders over here. I'll just haste this up a little. So my analysis of Daimon is that he's an incredible hero. He has many traits that make a player versus environment kind of hero, a PvE hero great. He scales off of enemies, stealing enemy health, buffing himself with their attack and defense, making him much stronger as the enemies grow stronger. And the essential mechanic where the enemies are punching into their own shield makes it scale so much better. It's almost like a hero ult in a sense, and he has been used on those compositions. So the ally buff is another aspect, allowing carries to take much less damage while he's active. So that means that all allies are taking much less damage, which will enable your comp to go forward, as he's very dedicated to staying alive, stealing all this health and granting it into a shield consistently over and over while the match goes on. He does need his SI and furniture, just unlike Mihira. So his signature item makes him debuff enemies stronger, and his furniture making the enemy composition take 40%. That's such a crazy figure. I want you to keep it in mind if he's frontlining. So that's a really crucial thing for him. He will need some of that investment, but he does not require ascending as much because, again, he scales off of the enemies. This also make him work great against slow compositions like this one that I'm showing here. So he's great against those slow compositions that wouldn't burst through his shield, and in those environments he enjoys energy support to ult faster, like the god comp, like Rowan, like Rosalie, and these kinds of heroes. But he also works in Celis Graveborn because of his non-carry centric nature. So all allies take less damage and deal more, enables that composition to counter abilities that other heroes will be using at them, and that composition is so counter-centric. All those heroes working together without a single carry works great with Daimon, because he can work with all these different allies to burst down enemies, counter their healing, work together, and his buff goes across all allies that work in tandem to make Daimon the beast that he really is. Alright, and with that, I'm gonna wrap up my quick summary of Daimon. I think he's incredible in PvE. I think he has very, very great features in PvP that we haven't explored completely yet. But I think Daimon is a great investment that you should definitely add to your team, because he can do many things just like here. Good, and much more.